Hello everyone! Welcome to Untold History, the channel where we explore stories that are often left out of textbooks. Today we are going to delve into a little remembered but deeply significant chapter in New Zealand's history, the Maori uprising in Parihaka. Not only did this event mark a turning point in the resistance against British colonial expansion in the Pacific, but it also stood as an early example of non-violent resistance, which continues to resonate in New Zealand's collective memory. By the end of the 19th century, British colonial expansion in New Zealand had reached a critical point. Since the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, Maori had seen their lands systematically taken away by European settlers, often under legal pretexts or directly by force. Although the Treaty of Waitangi had promised to protect Maori rights to their land, in practice land was confiscated on a large scale, especially in the most fertile and strategic regions such as Taranaki in the North Island. In response to this massive dispossession, the Maori people began to look for ways to resist the European invasion of their lands. The Taranaki region, which had been one of the hardest hit by the confiscations, became a hub of Maori resistance. It was in this context that two visionary leaders emerged, Te Waireo Rangamai and Tohu Kakahi. Both were deeply respected by their people, not only for their leadership but also for their spirituality and their commitment to justice. Te Waireo and Tohu established the village of Parihaka in 1866 as a refuge for Maori who had been displaced from their lands. Parihaka was not just a village but a symbol of peaceful resistance. The leaders adopted a strategy of civil disobedience, inspired by spiritual and moral principles that rejected violence. Rather than resort to arms, as had been the case in previous conflicts between Maori and British settlers, the people of Parihaka chose to resist non-violently. They plowed the lands that had been confiscated from them and rebuilt the fences that the colonial authorities destroyed again and again, in an act of constant but peaceful defiance. This approach to non-violent resistance was unusual for the time and baffled British colonial authorities. Accustomed to quelling Maori rebellions with military force, the British did not know how to respond to a movement that offered no armed resistance. However, colonial patience had a limit. As the civil disobedience movement grew, British authorities began to see it as a direct threat to their control over the region. On November 5, 1881, that tension reached its peak. More than 1,500 colonial troops, backed by the police, marched on Parihaka. Clashes were expected, but what they found was something completely different. The inhabitants of Parihaka, far from resisting, received the troops with astonishing peace. Women and children took to the streets singing and offering food to the soldiers, while the men sat quietly on the ground as a sign of non-violence. However, the peaceful determination of the Maori did not stop the British soldiers from proceeding with their plan. The village was razed to the ground, houses were destroyed, crops ruined, and the inhabitants were forcibly dispersed. The leaders, Te Waireo and Tohu, were arrested and imprisoned without trial, a clear violation of rights that even colonial laws should have guaranteed them. The inhabitants of Parihaka, who had resisted peacefully, were displaced, and the land they had worked so hard to protect was once again taken by the settlers. Parihaka uprising was a watershed moment in New Zealand's history. Although he failed to prevent land confiscation, his legacy has endured as an example of moral and spiritual resistance in the face of oppression. Te Waireo and Tohu, although imprisoned, became symbols of the struggle for justice and peace. Despite the brutality of the colonial response, their spirit was not destroyed. For many years, this history was relegated to oblivion, in part because it challenged the colonial narrative that dominated New Zealand's official history. However, in recent decades, there has been a resurgence in interest in Parihaka. This movement has been claimed as a symbol of reconciliation and the importance of keeping alive the memory of past injustices in order to build a more just future. Parihaka's peaceful resistance not only inspired future generations in New Zealand, but also finds parallels in other civil disobedience movements around the world. Although there is no direct evidence of contact, the tactics and philosophy bear a remarkable similarity to those of leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi in India and Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States. Both also advocated nonviolent resistance as a means of fighting injustice, and as in Parihaka, their movements faced harsh repression before achieving significant change. Another important aspect of this history is the way in which the movement influenced Maori cultural and spiritual identity. Te Waiti and Tohu's philosophy, focused on nonviolence and connection to the land, helped preserve key aspects of the Maori worldview, even in the face of colonizing pressure trying to impose their culture and values. Parihaka became a place where cultural practices were kept alive and collective Maori identity reinforced, which was crucial for cultural survival during a period of intense forced assimilation. Today, Parihaka is not only a place of remembrance but also a site of education and reflection. This story serves as a platform for broader conversations about Indigenous rights, social justice, and the need for an inclusive approach in building a nation that recognizes and celebrates its cultural diversity. In 2017, the New Zealand government issued an official apology for the acts committed against the Parihaka people, acknowledging the injustice and pain caused by the village's invasion and destruction. This apology was an important step toward reconciliation and marked a formal recognition of importance in the country's history. Today, Parihaka is remembered not only as a place of grief but also as a symbol of resilience and hope. Every year on November 5th, commemorations are held to remember the events of 1881 and to celebrate the spirit of peaceful resistance that characterizes Parihaka. This story is a reminder that the struggle for justice is not always fought with violence, and that moral resistance can be a powerful instrument of change. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the Maori uprising in Parihaka. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to stay up to date with our next stories. In Untold History, we continue to seek out and share those pivotal moments that have shaped the world we live in, but are often left out of official narratives. See you in the next episode of Untold Story.